Hello everybody, Julian Charles here of themindrenewed.com, coming to you as usual from the depths of the Lancashire countryside here in the UK. And welcome to episode 307, in which I'm still basically saying hello, like I was last time, so hello, like last time, and in which I'm sharing a few ponderings upon a lecture that I've been directed to several times recently via various social media links called Bananas in Heaven, by a man named Yuval Noah Harari, who I'm sure you're familiar with, which lecture has very slightly niggled me. So I thought I would very slightly niggle back, hence the title, Niggling Heavenly Bananas and Rights in Spleens. The rest of that will become clear in a minute. But, as I say, I'm essentially keeping in touch, because the interviews and roundtables that I've got planned for this year so far just haven't yet fallen into place. As you will appreciate, it can be really quite difficult to get guests pinned down to particular dates and particular times that just happen to be convenient to me and my podcast schedule here at TMR. You know, guests can be a bit like proverbial buses. You know, they don't come along, and then three come along at the same time. So here I am at the podcasting bus stop, so to speak, and while I'm waiting, I'll have a chat with those of you who happen to be waiting in the bus queue with me. So, Yuval Noah Harari and his talk, Bananas in Heaven. Now, as I say, I've been directed to this talk several times in the last couple of weeks, even though it dates back almost 10 years to October 2014. I guess it must have touched a nerve with people. It's been shared around quite a lot recently. And what people have been saying is that in this particular talk, a TEDx talk, Dr Harari claims that human rights don't exist. Yes, you heard that right. Human rights don't exist. So after this popping up quite so much in my various feeds, I thought I'd better go and check this out to see if it's true. And lo and behold, it is true. He does indeed say that. Human rights, along with things like heaven and God and countries and money, don't really exist, or as he puts it, they're not a reality. Now, to be fair, he does say that human rights kind of exist as part of fictional stories that we tell ourselves. So they kind of exist, this is my example by the way, not his, they kind of exist like, say, Ebenezer Scrooge kind of exists inside Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol. But of course no one's been able to walk up to Mr. Scrooge in reality and tell him what a nasty old skinflint he is, because he doesn't really exist. He only kind of exists inside a fictional story. And so it is, maintains Dr. Harari, with human rights, along with heaven, God, countries, and money. They're not really real. They're just, quote, a fictional story that we've invented and spread around. Now, I wouldn't normally be niggled by any of this, because loads of people say things like this, especially if they're trying to show how intellectually hair-shirt they are, in a Nietzschean kind of way, as opposed to old-fashioned people like me who are still holding on to the softly padded crutches of antiquated things like God and heaven, and human rights. And let me say in passing that things like money and countries, I've got no problem there. I think he's right about those, actually. I think they are products of human storytelling. Powerful, useful, I wouldn't be without them. Like Dr. Harari himself says, everybody believes in money. It's the most successful story of all. But God? Heaven? Human rights? Are they really in the same category as money and countries? I don't think so. But that's the story he's telling. Now, as I say, I wouldn't be niggled by any of this were it not for the fact that Dr. Harari is widely touted as a superstar public intellectual, and that he's closely associated with the World Economic Forum, which, as we know, thanks to the revelations of its founder and Starfleet commander Klaus Schwab, sees itself as the global hub of stakeholder capitalism, through which self-styled elites are condescending to steer the world into a brand new, sparkling, super sciencey, trekkie technotopia. In the most diverse, equitable, inclusive and sustainable manner, of course. Some say that Dr. Harari is indeed Klaus Schwab's right-hand man, or his chief advisor. Now, I've no idea about that. I haven't seen any good evidence to support that claim. I suppose I haven't looked that far. Maybe you know something about that. If you do, please let me know. But what I do know is that Dr. Harari has given 2 high-profile speeches at Davos, 2018 and 2020, both, I note, after 2014, when he said that human rights are not a reality, and that, as his website boasts, he has the ears of many heads of state and big tech CEOs. So, continuing with my niggle, it's not so much that he thinks that human rights aren't really real, or at least that's what he thought in 2014. Maybe he's changed his mind, I don't know. But the fact that the World Economic Forum has chosen such a person twice to give high-profile speeches. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't. They can ask who they like. It's totally up to them. But I do wonder what that might say about them. After all, I wouldn't want to be ushered into a brand new, sparkling, super sciencey, trekky technotopia by people who don't think that human rights are really real. Would you? I'm not saying that's what they do think, but you know, it makes one wonder. And impressions are impressions. Anyway, let's look at why Dr. Harari thinks that about human rights. Now here I'd love to include an audio clip or two, because that would make for a more interesting podcast. And I quite like editing in audio clips. It's quite fun. But unfortunately, TED conferences, under which banner TEDx talks are organised, doesn't like people sharing clips, so I won't do that. I'll just have to give an idea of what he said and make my comments. Now, if you want to hear the whole talk, by the way, which is only about 15 minutes, details will be in the show notes, of course. So, what does Dr. Harari say in this 2014 talk? Well, he says that there are various fields in which we human beings tell stories, fictional stories, such as the legal field, and the political field, and the economic field. And that an example of a fiction in the legal field would be human rights. And he illustrates this by saying that when we cut open a human being and we look inside, we find that person's blood, and we find their heart, and their lungs, and their kidneys, but we don't find any rights. No rights at all, because, quote, rights are not a biological reality. Now, okay, I get it. Dr. Harari was trying to be gently amusing there, and succeeding to some extent. I thought it was funny. I mean, I think he needed to work a little bit on that, you know, because hardly anybody else thought it was funny, but I thought it was funny. Anyway, gently amusing. So let me be gently amusing back. If I ever had the chance to speak to Dr. Harari, which, well, maybe I will. He must listen to this podcast, surely. He's a cultured man. I might ask him, Yuval, you don't mind me calling you Yuval, do you? Very good. Yuval, I see you're very keen on science. You talk a lot about it. So let me ask you, when you assert that human rights are not to be found in the blood, or next to the heart, or lungs, or kidneys when we open up the human body, have you ever looked? Or can you cite any peer-reviewed literature by scientists who have ever performed such an experiment? Or, God forbid, can you cite any preprint paper to that effect? I mean, have you, or any scientist you know of, ever opened a human spleen to see if there's a human right in there somewhere? You say there isn't, but until you look, you don't really know, do you? But of course, as I say, he was joking. What he's really saying, I think, is that unless something is a material thing, then it's not really real. We know a mountain is really real because we can, quote, see it. We can, quote, touch it. We can, quote, smell it. Can you smell a mountain? Yeah, I guess so. Mountains, trees, rivers, these are material, objective things. I can't say I've ever smelt a cork, though. Not knowingly, anyway. Have you? I've certainly never smelled any minds. Not even his. I mean, much as I disagree with him, I think he's got one. And the prospect of smelling the number 7, that makes me feel a bit bilious, to be honest. I know, numbers might not be really real, but then again, they might. Anybody know what they smell like? If you do, let me know. My point is that whether Dr. Harari likes it or not, and as he well knows, there are people in this world, I think the vast majority of people actually, who do in fact believe, and I would say perceive, that human rights are really real, based on natural rights that are an objective reality, and that their being really real is of critical importance, even though we can't see them, touch them, or smell them, or hear them or taste them for that matter. Now, I think I know what he'd say. Forgive me if I'm wrong, Yuval, if you happen to be listening, which you may well, because you're a cultured man. I think he'd say, aha, but show me how those rights are grounded. Unless you can show me how those rights are grounded in hard reality, unless you can do that, It's just not rational to believe in them as anything other than stories that we tell ourselves and spread around. And I would say, doesn't matter, Yuval. I don't think I need to show how natural rights are grounded in order for it to be rational for me to believe in them as really real, as universal, as binding. I don't think I need to show that. I mean, some people, famous people, even more famous than you, I think, have said that things like that, little things like unalienable rights, are self-evident. Self-evident, irrespective of whether we can show how they're grounded or not. And there are quite a few things like that are self-evident. It's self-evident, to me at least, that there are other minds. That when I look around me and I see other people and I talk to them and they kindly talk back to me, I'm encountering minds other than my own, and not robots. Can't prove it, though. It's self-evident, again, to me at least, that the universe wasn't created 25 minutes ago by a wicked demiurge with all the appearance of age. Can't prove it. It's self-evident, again, to me at least, that when I survey the world around me, I don't see the product of my godlike solipsistic imagination. Can't prove it, though. Loads of things that are self-evident to me, that it's more rational for me to continue to believe than to disbelieve, even though I can't prove them or show how they're grounded. Now, as it happens, I think that natural rights are grounded in the mind and character of God, whose fundamental disposition is loving kindness. And while we're at it, that's why I think people perceive rights, normally. We're made that way. We're made to perceive them. And I find that intellectually satisfying as well. Now, I know you don't, Yuval, because you don't believe in God. You said so publicly, which, that's up to you. That's up to you. But it is a pity, because then you wouldn't be moved to write things like, quote, "As far as we can tell, from a purely scientific viewpoint, human life has absolutely no meaning." As you do, so I'm told anyway, in your book Sapiens. Why from a purely scientific viewpoint? Why would you say that? Isn't that a bit like trying to look at a beautiful vista through a pair of binoculars with one eye closed, then complaining that it all looks a bit flat? It reminds me of trying to find human rights in spleens. And belief in God might have saved you from saying, as you do in this talk, that our ancestors 70,000 years ago were, quote, insignificant animals, because they didn't have much impact on the world. Because, even unsophisticated ancient people who've never boldly gone anywhere were made to be God's image bearers. At least that's what I believe. Each one loved by God. But then I guess God is just one more of those intractable thingies that you can't squeeze into a test tube or scan with a tricorder. So, along with human rights, he must be just one more fictional story amongst others that we tell ourselves to make ourselves feel better. But then again, some stories are true, aren't they, Yuval? Isn't your story true? Surely your story's true, isn't it? Otherwise, why are you telling it? Or maybe not. Maybe you need to rethink your story. Maybe you need to stop looking in spleens. Maybe you need to use the binoculars with both lenses and really see the vista for what it is. God, heaven, and human rights. They're all real. They're all really real. You just need to use both eyes to see them. You have been listening to me, Julian Charles, of themindrenewed.com, and I very much look forward to speaking to you again.